Today, guys, we are going to talk about 10 tips that I can give you that are going to help your mixing 100%. I'm going to start off right away going into this, so there's no fluff in this video. Tip number 1 is listen to other popular music in your mixing environment. I can't tell you how important this is, that you need to be listening to other people's music, other popular music that you listen to in the car, at the club, or wherever. You need to be listening to that because you need to know how that sounds. Because once you know how that sounds, then you can translate that to your other mixes. Okay? I listen to a lot of different music. I'll put my speakers on, I'll put my monitors on, and I'll listen to Nirvana, and I'll listen to these tracks in my environment where my monitors are set up, how I would be sitting in the chair as I was mixing down my own record or mixing down a client's record, and I would be able to hear those nuances that I hear when I'm listening to popular music. You'll be able to hear what the kick drum sounds like. You'll be able to hear what the hi-hats sound like, or the vocals and where they sit in the mix. So it's very, very important to listen to other popular music in your mixing environment. Number 2, study your frequencies. What do I mean by that? I mean your EQ frequencies. So let me pop up EQ here. You have frequency band, okay? 20 hertz up to 20,000 hertz, okay? You need to study these bands. You need to know what they sound like. You need to know that this is the low end, this is the high end, this is the mids, okay? And when you're doing EQ moves where you're cutting something at, let's say you're cutting something here at 50 hertz and you're cutting it by, let's do 3.5 dB right here. You need to know how that sounds. You need to know what you're actually cutting out of that EQ. And there's a lot of different websites out there where you can learn frequencies, where they'll test your ears. You need to learn these frequency bands. Otherwise, you'll be mixing in the dark. You'll be boosting over here, not knowing that you're boosting all of these frequencies from here all the way over to here. And you might be screwing something up. You might be taking something out of the mix, or you might be adding something to the mix. When you boost, you're adding volume. So you have to know what you're actually adding, what kind of volume you're actually adding. This is very, very important. You could be mixing down here. You could, be down here in the low end, trying to cut something out that you actually need in the mix to keep it thick. So you need to understand your frequency bands. That's very, very important. Here's another one. Use your mute button to identify issues. What does that mean? So let's say we're listening to a mix and we hear something and it's popping out in your ear. One thing that I like to do is I like to sit back and I like to not touch anything, and I like to just listen. And when I hear something that it's like bothering my ear, what I'll do is I'll go and I'll mute things until I find what's bothering my ear. So I'll mute the guitar. Okay, it's not the guitar because I still hear it. I'll mute, each individual drum track. So I'll start with the kick, then I'll go to the 808. Is it still there or did it stop? If it's still there, you keep going until you find it. Sometimes it's in the weirdest frequencies, and sometimes it's in the instrument that you don't think it's actually in. Those frequencies will pop out at you and they'll drive your ear nuts. And what happens is you'll get ear fatigue. And if you get ear fatigue, your listeners will get ear fatigue. So make sure you're using that mute button to identify issues that are popping out in your mix, things that you want to take care of, things that you have to cut out of the mix in order for you to have a smooth mix where it doesn't give your listeners ear fatigue. It's very, very important, okay? Tip number 4, and this is a huge one, and remember this because this happens. A lot of the times we don't notice it when we're mixing because we're so deep and involved in that mix that we don't understand that sometimes we are emotionally connecting to that song, and that's what our audience is doing. So one of the biggest things is to pay attention to when you get goosebumps or goose chills, right? When your hair stands up on your arm, or it stands up on the back of your neck, or you kind of get that shiver. Pay attention to that, because when you get to that shivering point, your audience is going to get to that shivering point. They're also going to feel those goosebumps. They're also going to connect to that song where they get the shivers, where they get the chills. That is super, super important when you're mixing a record. When you get to that level, you have connected emotionally to that song, and that is so big and it is so important. Tip number 5, mix into a limiter. What does that mean? Okay, let me explain what that means here. So right here I have the glue, and it's from Cytomic. It's an amazing plugin, and it's a compressor, and it glues all the tracks together. And what I want to do is, when I'm starting my mix, I want to put a compressor on the mix bus. As you can see right here, we have the mix bus. I want to be able to put a compressor on that mix bus so that it glues all of the tracks together, so all of the tracks feel like they're cohesive, like they're put together. And one of the things is when you mix with the glue, and you don't have to have much compression, maybe 2 dB of gain reduction. But what happens is that when you're mixing in to the compressor, you're actually not going to get surprised at the end of the mix, because you don't have to then, after you get done with the whole mix, then add a compressor to it, which then could throw off some of your frequencies and could throw off your mix. You don't want to do that. So you want to actually mix into a limiter, or mix into a compressor on your mix bus. And I do. I basically have the glue here, and then I'll also have the L2 from FabFilter. I like to mix with that too as well. So I'll put that on here as well. I don't have that on here now, but usually I would. And so I would have the compressor compressing some of those frequencies to tame them down, and then I would put a clipper on there, and then I'd put my L2 on there, and that way there's no like gotchas at the end of your mix where you're like, okay, now I got to throw a limiter on, I got to throw a compressor on, because that can screw up your mix. And so you don't want to work backwards. You want to work smarter, not harder. So definitely mix into a compressor, and definitely mix into a limiter. It's going to help you, trust me. Tip number 6, and this is a very important tip, and this is probably one of those tips that you need to write down and like put the sticky note right on your computer. But do a static mix before you touch any plugins. When you level out your mix, when you balance out your mix, and you have it panned correctly and you have it leveled correctly, you can get a mix 80% finished. I'm not lying when I say that percentage. A lot of people think, when they get all the audio files in here, you get all the audio files, you're so excited, you're like, okay, what am I going to do first? Okay, let's start with the lead vocal. So then you come to the lead vocal, and you're like, okay, I got the lead vocal. Let me put on an EQ right away and start EQing to make this sound better. You don't need to do that. What you need to do is make sure every single element in your mix sounds like it's working with each other, not against each other. So when you start to balance things out and start to pan things out, you're putting them in their own frequency ranges to where you're actually going to be able to hear like a full rough mix of your mix that will be well balanced, and everything will be working cohesively together to where it won't feel like it's out of place, where the kick drum's too high, or the vocals too low, or you don't have enough bass, or whatever it might be. You want to get your mix sounding as best as possible statically before you touch any plugins. And that is something that I would have to say is less is more when it comes to mixing. Okay? So definitely pay attention to that. And tip number 7 kind of goes the same way with it. Your mix needs to be balanced. So your pans and your frequency and your instruments. You don't want to have too much in the mid range. You don't want to have too much in the low end. You don't want to have too much in the high end. You want to have it all perfectly balanced. So again, those 2 tips right there are going to help you out tremendously, because once you have a static balanced mix, like I said, you're 80% there, and it will help you so much, because you will start to hear that you're actually forming a song versus paying attention to single elements. That's another one. And I'll say this with the tip 7. Never, ever, ever, ever mix in mono. You can check your mix in mono, but come right back to stereo and keep it going in stereo, because when you mix in mono, there's a lot of stuff that can happen, and you don't want to be, surprised at the end of your mix when something's not sounding correctly because you decided to mix everything in mono or everything in solo. That's another one. Don't mix in solo. Don't solo your guitar and make it sound like the most beautiful guitar in the world, because when you turn your mix back on, when you turn the song back on, that guitar is not going to fit in at all, because you are not listening to everything that is surrounding that guitar. That guitar has elements that are working with it, just like in a live band when you're on stage. That guitar is not the only thing you hear. You hear the drums, you hear the bass guitar, you hear the keyboard, and you hear the vocalist. So pay attention to stuff that is fully in the mix. Immerse yourself into the mix fully without soloing a lot of different stuff. Now, when you're cutting stuff out, you can use the solo button to cut stuff out, but then turn it back on so that you can hear the whole mix, and then you can hear what you've cut out and bypass that plugin so you know what you're cutting out, what is taking away from the mix, and you will be really surprised when you do that, because your mixes will sound a lot better. Tip number 8, and here's a big one. Turn your tracks down, okay? Because you don't want to clip the master fader. You don't want to clip this guy over here. So turn your tracks down when you start mixing. A lot of the times when I send my mixes out to another engineer to kind of give that polish on them, even though I've mixed the song down, I got the rough done, I'm like, okay, I'm going to send these out again just to hear a second opinion. I'll put it down to -6 dB before I send it. So when they get it, it's not blasting out their speakers. But then again, they'll sit there and they'll mix it at -6 dB because they don't want to clip this master over here. And that is a big one. So when you have it down that low and you can't hear it, just turn your headphones up or turn your monitors up. That's all you got to do. Just literally turn your speakers up. If you have the tracks down that low, you'll hear it at high volume of what you want to hear it at, but the mix will be super low, and then you'll be able to hear all of those nuances and be able to cut and boost what you need to do. So again, very, very important tip. Make sure you turn your speakers up and turn the tracks down. Number 9, less is more, okay? What does that mean? If you look at this mix, which is almost a finished product right here, less is more. How many plugins do I have on each channel? I have just a few on some of the channels, a few sends here for the vocal delays. I have a vocal delay bus right here with the Valhalla plate on it with the delay. I have just a few plugins. I don't have plugins on every single channel, because if you do that, you're just over processing, you're over compressing, you're just smashing down your mix to where it's going to sound thin and brittle. And we don't want a thin or a brittle mix, because when you have a thin or brittle mix, when you listen to that and you compare that to the other songs that are on the radio, they're gonna have that full thick vocal, that full thick low end, that full mid range, and yours is going to be just super, super tiny next to it, and it's going to sound amateurish, and it's going to sound like an unprofessional mix. You don't want that. So you want to be able to process your mix and be able to use plugins to fix certain things in your mix, but you don't want to smash your mix down to where you have a thin and brittle mix. Very, very important. Less is more. And number 10, use subtractive EQ. What does that mean? That means when you're using your EQ, instead of always thinking, oh, I need to boost this to make this sound better, remove some of those frequencies, and you'll be surprised at how much you can actually clean up in your mix. Like, for instance, and this is I mean, I'm not using this, like, I'm not going to use this in my mix, but like, for instance, you could take it over here and you can cut out, 80 hertz of low end so that you can have your bass over there. Let's say these are the vocals. You can cut out 80 hertz of your low end to 120 to make sure that those vocals are shining and that they're not being affected by that bass or that rumble down here. And a lot of the times, you don't have to do it on every mix, but a lot of the times you'll want to cut out at least 20 hertz because our ears can't hear 20 hertz, okay? So you want to cut out that low end, that rumble down here, because it's just muddying up your mix, and you don't need to do that. So don't ever think that you have to leave that in there to have a thick vocal, because the more that you have it in the mid range and you put some sizzle on the high end right here, you're going to have a much more clear vocal in there. So use subtractive EQ. Boosting adds more volume to your mix, which then in returns adds more mud that you have to kind of balance out the frequencies even more. But when you cut stuff down, you're cutting things out that your ear is picking up, and you're like, oh, you know what? I don't like this frequency. So you cut it out, and then you listen, you bypass the plugin, you listen to what you've cut out, then you turn it back on, and you're like, okay, I've taken out a frequency that I don't like, that's bothering my ear, that's going to bother the listener's ear, just like I was saying before. And you want to cut, and when you cut stuff out, you don't have to go very far. 1, 2 dB at the most sometimes, but other times, you might have to pull this thing way down and really narrow out that band or that cue, and pull it down 11 dB or whatever to get it completely out of the mix. But most of the time, you don't have to do that. You can just, do 1 to 2 dB. And let me put this back here. 1 to 2 dB to get that frequency out of your mix like that. So those are the 10 tips that I have for you guys. I've actually put together a really amazing PDF for you guys. It's free, okay? And it's 10 mixing secrets that every beginner engineer must know. And all you have to do is give me your email address. You send it, it's going to come right down into your email box. It's amazing tips that I did not share here with you today that you're going to want to know. And once you get through with that guide and you found some education in it and you found it valuable, I've also written something called the Indie Mixing Bible, okay? And what you'll learn inside that is gain staging secrets, the kick and bass that translates everywhere. So you're going to learn how to make your low end punch on a car, stereo, earbuds, club systems. You got vocal pro vocal chains like EQ, compression, how that all works, how automation works. The glue strategy with Mixbus, we go deeper into that in the book. Fixing mud and harshness in your EQs. And then there's a lot of shortcuts and methods that I've developed over the last 20 years of doing music. So make sure that you go and grab the free PDF up here. But then if you're really serious and you want a blueprint plan to every time you sit down for a mix, you grab this Indie Mixing Bible and you open it up and you start following it step by step, your mixes are going to become a lot more clear. You're going to have a lot more clarity to what you're actually doing. And you're going to be hireable because people are going to understand that you know the lingo to how to mix a record, okay? And that is my treat to you guys with this free mixing guide right here. It is at therealdrama.com/mixing services. Otherwise, you could just put mix for short. Both of those work. They both lead you to the same page. Anyways, guys, I hope you've learned something. If you have, please subscribe to this channel. And until next time, go out and make some incredible music.